I would like to tell you a few stories of a place like no other. The setting, New York, New York, the most populated city in the United States. However, these stories do not take place under towering buildings or on crowded streets. Instead, on an island just off of the city's coast, with attractions big and small, famous and infamous. Some called it America's Playground, others the Nickel Empire. Its critics called it Sodom by the Sea. These stories, 5 to be precise, each star a different person, all characters in their own right. While not entirely comprehensive when told in succession, these stories reveal a history filled with theatrics, frustration, audacity, intrigue, conspiracy, and thrills of all kinds. Welcome to Coney Island. Welcome to the show. The first story stars Frederick Law Olmsted, an architect and social critic, who believed that he understood the city's problems. In the mid-19th century, New York was plagued with issues, some unique to its landscape, some common problems exacerbated by the tolls of the city. Most concerning to socialites was crime and poverty. Olmsted believed that this was not the fault of the people, but of the urban landscape in which they lived. He believed that the concrete jungle made people more selfish and crude, and the city's vast social issues could be traced back to its dreary setting. City planners felt the same, and Olmsted and his design partner, Calvert Vaux, were chosen to design a public park in Manhattan. Opening in 1858, Central Park was Olmsted's solution to the citizens' seedy behavior. Olmsted believed that the contemplation of nature, even manicured nature, was critical for the betterment of society, an effective method of integrating social and economic classes together, a lesson in citizenship and civility. Put simply, plants calm people down. While Olmsted's famous public parks would go hand in hand with his social critiques, he would also play a large part in the development of a place that would be the antithesis to his ideals. Coney Island was a small island just off of the southern coast of Brooklyn. Since the early 1800s, the land had held a few residents, some farmland, and over 3 miles of sandy beaches. Separating Coney Island from Brooklyn was a small creek, in which there was no official way to cross. That was until 1829, when the first bridge, named Shell Road, connected the island to the mainland, and Coney Island was given its first, albeit small, hotel. Over the next 4 decades, development would continue at a slow pace, with the addition of a rail line and a horse car line attempting to draw more New Yorkers to the beach. It wasn't until after the Civil War that Coney Island's potential would be noticed, and it was partly Olmsted's fault. In an attempt to better connect Brooklyn to the beach, Olmsted and Vaux designed a boulevard that would eventually be named Ocean Parkway, that would run from Prospect Park to Coney Island. The project, which was to be completed in 1876, would make traveling to Coney Island much more convenient. Most significantly, the plans caught the attention of people with money. Not just any money, but railroad money. Wealthy developers began seeing Coney Island's potential as a beach resort space. Railroad magnate William Engelman would build a hotel on the island in 1870 named the Ocean Hotel, on a beach that he would soon name Brighton Beach, after the Brighton seaside resort in Sussex. This would draw the attention of another railroad tycoon, a notorious robber baron, Austin Corbin, who would purchase the land to the east of Brighton Beach, naming it Manhattan Beach in an attempt to draw New York's elite. He would also publicly declare that Jewish people were banned from his resort, also in an attempt to draw wealthy anti-Semites, which backfired in the press, but did appeal to certain members of the upper class. As Engelman and Corbin continued to grow their resorts tailored to the moderately wealthy and the eerily wealthy, the rest of Coney Island would see development appealing to those that were less fortunate. This area would become known as West Brighton. A significant portion of West Brighton would be owned by railroad investor Andrew Culver. Another portion would be controlled by the Sea Beach Railroad Company. Culver and Sea Beach would compete with one another, both building rails to the beach, as well as vying to construct the longest pier. While Culver and Sea Beach were busy measuring their docks, other businesses were setting up shop on the rest of West Brighton. This resulted in many unique, creative, and some questionable ventures attempting to capture the eyes and pocketbooks of the lower-income beachgoers. Casinos, restaurants, bathhouses, brothels, and cabarets sprout up. Everywhere a visitor turned, there was either someone trying to swindle them with a rigged game or get them drunk enough to rob them outright. This was allowed by the Commissioner of Common Lands, John McCain. No relation. McCain was a corrupt politician who owned a construction company that would build many of Coney Island's structures, so it was in his best interest to allow as many businesses as possible, regardless of whether they acted ethically or not. Fires were a common occurrence on the island, whether by accident or arson, and when McCain's company was not building new structures, they were rebuilding charred ones. The rising middle class of New York and the growing immigrant population flocked to West Brighton. It was an escape from the city, the exact opposite of the one Olmsted had presented. Coney Island became known not for its tranquil scenery, but for its thrills. It was an overindulgence in the aspects of human nature that Olmsted and many other social critics viewed as immoral. These negative opinions did little to stop the growth of Coney Island, and it was not even able to prevent some members of the upper class from embarking on a day of pleasure. Unlike Brighton, and especially unlike Manhattan Beach, West Brighton became known as a melting pot of class and culture, and this was just the beginning. Sideshows, card games, and bathhouses dominated West Brighton, but more substantial and creative additions were on their way. The 7-story Elephant Hotel became an icon of the island, despite its eventual transition into its most prominent brothel. Many amusement rides began to populate West Brighton, but the star was inventor Lamarcus Adna Thompson's Switchback Gravity Railway, one of America's first roller coasters. This wooden coaster had guests climb a tower, board a car, and powered by gravity alone, brave multiple camelback hills, ending at the opposite tower. Guests would then climb this tower as well, with their cart being raised to meet them. After boarding once again, riders would complete the return trip. The Switchback Railway opened in 1884, and it was an incredible success. Coney Island also became known as the possible birthplace of the hot dog, which by some accounts was invented and sold on the island by German immigrant Charles Feltman. At the very least, Coney Island would popularize the dish and some of its unique variations. Olmsted, now in his late 60s, had continued his landscape architecture. He still believed strongly in the value of nature and the scenic escapism from the urban landscape, but he was not done inadvertently influencing the growth of the immoral oasis of Coney Island. In the early 1890s, Olmsted was approached by an acquaintance of architect Daniel Burnham. Burnham wanted Olmsted to consult on the 1893 Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Olmsted initially declined given the quick turnaround and nature of the event, but soon accepted after realizing that the fair would give his art a platform for greater appreciation. The fair would be massively influential, and Olmsted's work would be praised. However, the exposition would arguably motivate the growth of Coney Island more than it would the field of landscape architecture. The White City of the fair would inspire the design of the park soon to populate West Brighton, and in no time at all, the amusements of the Columbian Exposition's Midway, including its signature Ferris wheel, would make their way to Coney Island. For all of Olmsted's efforts and social criticisms, one of his lasting impacts on the Empire City would be the Pleasure Center off the coast of Brooklyn. The subject of our second story was a man that was also present at the 1893 Columbian Exposition, perhaps one of the most peculiar visitors the fair had. The man's name was Captain Paul Boyton. Born in 1849, Boyton had joined the U.S., Mexican, and French navies by the age of 24. Boyton then turned his attention to life-saving. In the early 1870s, he helped create the first life-saving service at Atlantic City. It was there that he learned of a new aquatic safety invention, an inflatable rubber suit that acted as a life preserver. Boyton experimented with the device and soon found that the rubber suit transformed the user into a vessel, allowing them to comfortably stay afloat at sea, paddle along with the current, and even reach impressive speeds while riding waves. Boyton saw great potential in the rubber suit and sought to advocate for its adoption. To do so, he planned a bold stunt. He was going to board a ship in New York, sail until he was a few hundred miles off of the coast, and then jump overboard and paddle to shore. Boyton had thought of everything. He had over a week's worth of provisions, and he even carried an axe in case of a shark attack. The plan seemed foolproof, but no captain would allow it on their ship. Not deterred, Boyton snuck onto the Queen, a steamer headed for Ireland, hiding until it was time to attempt his stunt. When 250 miles off of the Irish coast, Boyton made his way to the deck, inflated the suit, and attempted to jump. However, he was stopped by the crew and taken to the ship's skipper, Captain Bragg. Bragg wanted him in the brig, but Boyton began to brag on the suit. Bragg bought the brag and kept Boyton out of the brig, allowing him to attempt his stunt, 30 miles off of the coast instead of 250. Thankful, Boyton inflated his suit and went overboard. He floated for hours, braving an unexpected storm and avoiding the sharp rocks off of the coast. Exhausted and weak after his journey, Boyton crawled ashore the next morning, victorious. News of his success traveled fast, and Boyton attempted more daring stunts. His journeys became that of legend, and he was recognized around the world, often referred to as the Fearless Frogman. In the late 1880s, he joined P.T. Barnum's Greatest Show on Earth, before semi-retiring in the early 1890s, when he transitioned from a daredevil to a showman. In 1894, he opened Paul Boynton's Water Chutes, a unique park in Chicago, combining the thrills of the Midway that he had viewed at the 1893 Columbian Exposition and the model used by the circuses in which he traveled. Boynton created what many refer to as the first modern amusement park, by asking visitors to pay an admission fee before entering a gated park full of mechanical attractions. The signature attraction would be Shoot the Chutes, a new water ride concept that Boynton had viewed in Europe. By the time Paul Boynton's Water Chutes opened, Boynton was already dreaming of a second park, eyeing a piece of land on New York City's Coney Island, around 20 acres near the Elephant Hotel on West Brighton. The park would also feature the exciting Shoot the Chutes water ride, as well as North America's first looping coaster, the Flip Flap Railway. Designed by inventor Lena Beecher, the uncomfortable ride had guests brave a circular loop, resulting in intense G-forces that disoriented or injured riders. Boynton's Park would be named after the park's elaborate water shows, which featured performers demonstrating some of Boynton's signature aquatic contraptions, accompanied by trained sea lions. Boynton's West Brighton Park, named Sea Lion Park, would open on July 4, 1895, as Coney Island's first amusement center. It was marketed as a clean, both, quote, morally and physically, environment. The success of Sea Lion Park was overwhelming. In the first few seasons, the crowds could not be controlled. On some particularly busy days, people were renting bathing suits so quickly that the staff had no time to wash them. Instead, guests returning them simply handed their used suits directly to the next renter. To keep up with demand, Boynton would add one of the first Old Mill rides. An Old Mill ride is a boat ride through dark tunnels. This encouraged couples to hold one another in the darkness at a time where any public physical touching was considered taboo. That behavior was reserved for the privacy of the home, or the giant elephant brothel a few yards away. Boynton would also add caged wolves and a ballroom to the park. In 1901, another looping coaster named Loop the Loop was added. This ride featured an elliptical loop, reducing the pain and discomfort caused by the Flip Flap Railway's inversion. However, by this point, it was becoming more difficult to compete with the other attractions of Coney Island. The main commercial traffic of West Brighton did not draw crowds naturally to Sea Lion Park, which was closer to the island's less friendly bars and restaurants. With fewer and fewer guests coming to the park, Boynton made a last-ditch effort to bring the crowds back, investing $100,000 in improvements ahead of the 1902 season. This included the purchase of Topsy, an elephant that had killed a spectator the previous month, labeling her as a bad elephant and generating a media frenzy, one that Boynton was hoping to take advantage of. Despite the attempt at a revitalization, a rainy summer season in 1902 negated Boynton's efforts. Now in his mid-50s and having operated the park for 8 seasons, Boynton seemed ready to move on, and when he was approached by 2 men to sell Sea Lion Park, its attractions, and some of its animals, he agreed. These 2 buyers were motivated by another person who was present at the Columbian Exposition in 1893, a man named George Tilliou. Tilliou, like Boynton, was a showman, but while Boynton traded in bravery, Tilliou was intelligent, even-tempered, as cool as an icebox. He could sell sand to beachgoers, which he actually did on Coney Island at the age of 14. His father owned a restaurant and hotel on West Brighton, so the island was all Tilliou ever knew, and he knew it well. At the age of 20, George, with the help of his father, built Coney Island's first vaudeville theater and created a boardwalk outside, which would become one of Coney Island's main avenues of commerce, being dubbed the Bowery. Despite the Tilliou's efforts to keep the area decent and family-friendly, John McCain's corrupt business partners soon infiltrated the Strip. However, McCain's unethical practices would finally come under scrutiny in 1887, when he was investigated by the State Department. No one dared testify against McCain. No one, except George Tilliou. Unfortunately, nothing came of the investigation, no doubt due to McCain's influence. In retaliation for blowing the whistle on his operation, McCain made it nearly impossible for the Tillious to do business on Coney Island, forcing them out of many of their ventures. But George Tilliou remained, and lucky for him, a political shakeup in 1894 led to McCain's imprisonment for election fraud. With the powerful boss of West Brighton banished, Tilliou was finally able to expand his operations on Coney Island, having been inspired in the meantime. At the 1893 Columbian Exposition, Tilliou was moved by Ferris's wheel, and he believed its permanent home should be on Coney Island. However, it was already planned to be moved to Chicago's Lincoln Park. It would then be moved to St. Louis for the 1904 World's Fair, before eventually being blown up by dynamite. But by then, Tilliou had already come up with an alternative. After his offer was rejected for Ferris's wheel, he decided to build his own. On newly rented land, Tilliou put up a sign stating, quote, "On this site will be erected the world's largest Ferris wheel." This was not the case, but Tilliou would succeed in renting land near the Bowery for a 125-foot Ferris wheel, half the size of Ferris's original attraction. To pay for its construction, Tillyou leased the land immediately surrounding it to other vendors, and Tillyou himself owned other amusement rides throughout West Brighton, such as the Aerial Slide, an early predecessor to the Zip Line, the Intramural Bicycle Railway, and the Double Dip Chutes. In 1895, Tillyou took notice of Captain Paul Boynton's Sea Lion Park and its effective admission setup. Tillyou realized that he could build a similar park, simply by centralizing his various attractions on the lucrative land on the Bowery. Tillyou knew that if he was to compete with Sea Lion Park, he would need a signature attraction to compete with Boynton Chutes. On a trip to England, Tillyou found the perfect ride. It was a racing contraption in which guests rode wooden horses down parallel tracks. Considering the popularity of horse racing at the time, the ride was a perfect fit for Coney Island. Tillyou purchased the rights to the ride and built one as the centerpiece of his park, which he would name Steeplechase Park after the ride. The park would open for the 1897 season. Tillyou would go all out for the park's signature steeplechase attraction. He employed the use of people dressed as jockeys, announcers to voice over the races, and details such as quarter-mile posts and a finish line to create a sense of immersion. However, the ride's main appeal for guests was the seating setup, in which men and women rode on the same car, forcing them to hold on to one another in the light of the shining sun, otherwise known as God's eye. Tillyou, being an intelligent showman that studied his guests, found that any attraction that hung, spun, or swung women into the laps, arms, or bodies of male riders was inherently more popular, and Tillyou, and soon the other showmen of Coney Island, purposefully searched for and designed attractions that did just this. This was key in transforming West Brighton into a place for everyone. Those that came to the island for a safe day of entertainment were not mortified by the physical interaction, as the rides provided an excuse for the behavior. But for those that had always come to Coney Island for an escape from the expectations of proper society, they were not disappointed either, because they got to touch woman's shoulders, or as it was known in 1897, third base. Tillyou continued to grow the park as the 20th century neared. In 1901, he met two men named Frederick Thompson and Elmer Skip Dundee. Thompson had created an attraction for the 1901 Pan American Exposition named A Trip to the Moon, an early dark ride that simulated a trip for 30 passengers to the moon aboard a rocket ship called Luna 3. The large vehicle was suspended from the ceiling, and as the vehicle moved throughout the building, fans blew to sell the effect. Guests would pass over a few locations depicted by paintings before landing on the moon. There, the guests would disembark, but the attraction was not over. After exiting the vehicle, guests would walk around a papier-mâché cavernous lunar world, filled with costumed characters known as Selenites, who would furiously munch on green cheese. Within the ride itself was a gift shop selling the green cheese. Guests were then led to the palace of the Man on the Moon, with dancing moon maidens, before making the trip back to Earth through the mouth of a lunar monster, climbing down a rope ladder to the ride's exit. A trip to the moon was elaborate and expensive, both in terms of construction and operation, but it was also incredibly profitable. Its mastermind was Thompson, an ambitious artist that enjoyed the social rewards of his creations. His partner, Dundee, was the business side of the operation, and he was charismatic and competitive. Their partnership worked perfectly. Their enormous success at the Pan American Exposition drew the attention of Tillyou, who believed the ride would be a hit at Steeplechase. Thompson and Dundee were very interested in a permanent attraction at Coney Island. Both seemed to be interested in climbing the social ranks of New York City, and from the start, the duo had more entertainment ventures planned. But Tillyou knew Coney Island, and placing a trip to the moon at Steeplechase was a perfect first step. The ride was once again a success, saving Steeplechase from the rainy summer that would plague the resort and sink Boynton's Sea Lion Park. It wasn't long until Thompson and Dundee were considering opening their own park. Some speculate that Tillyou knew this, and when it came time to renegotiate the lease for a trip to the moon, Tillyou demanded 60% of the profits from the ride, instead of the 40% in the original agreement. One theory is that Tillyou, with all of his insights into the island's business, wanted the duo to create their own park, because he believed it could only draw more business to the island and to Steeplechase. No matter the reason, Tillyou's negotiation tactic pushed Thompson and Dundee to create their own park, offering to purchase Sea Lion Park from Boynton, who agreed and left the amusement park business that he had revolutionized. The duo got to work renovating Sea Lion Park into a brand new amusement park, named Luna Park, partly after the ship from their popular attraction. Many of the attractions at Sea Lion Park were removed in the renovation, but Thompson and Dundee made sure to keep Boynton's most popular ride, the water chutes. The park would use short-term leases for many of its attractions, as Tillyou did with Steeplechase. However, the aesthetic differences between the two parks was striking. Luna Park was a pageant of fantastical architecture. It would become known as the Electric Eden, from the 250,000 lights used to illuminate it at night. It exuded the elegance of the Columbian Exposition while stripping it of its pretension, replacing the rigidity of the White City with a curved world of fantasy. An important design element was the creation of a visual focal point for the park, which came in the form of a 200-foot tall tower, which was decorated in 20,000 lights and flanked at the bottom by fountains. The park was planned to open for the 1903 season. However, there was one piece of business that Thompson and Dundee had to attend to: Topsy the elephant. The duo had inherited almost everything from Boynton, which included his animals, and while animal trainer Carl Hagenbeck would put on shows at the park, Topsy the elephant would not be part of them. Thompson and Dundee made an effort to turn Topsy's bad reputation around, showcasing her transporting the dirigible from a trip to the moon in its move from Steeplechase to Luna Park. However, they soon gave up on the creature after having to fire its trainer, a notorious drunk, for letting the elephant loose on the streets and riding her while he was intoxicated into a police station. Since Thompson and Dundee were running low on construction funds in early 1903, just a few months before their opening season, they decided to put Topsy down by hanging her from the neck in front of a paying audience. This caused the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals to step in. The ASPCA refused to allow Thompson and Dundee to charge admission, and they took issue with the plan to hang Topsy from the neck on the grounds of cruelty. Alternatives were discussed. What if they could poison Topsy with cyanide, or electrocute her, or perhaps choke her to death with a mechanical winch? The American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals said that all three would be perfect, and Thomas Edison's company, who would assist in the electrocution, asked if they could film the event and sell the footage on kinetoscopes. The more the merrier, said Thompson, Dundee, and the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Topsy was poisoned, electrocuted, and choked on January 4th, 1903. The ASPCA said that they had, quote, never seen a more humane manner of causing death, which unfortunately was probably true at the time. After this, construction continued. New rides were created for Luna Park, such as the War of the Worlds, in which guests would view a simulated naval battle with miniature ships. Another attraction inspired by the works of Jules Verne, named 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, had guests enter a submarine and look out of portholes. The submarine was then submerged, and over 3 miles of canvas on multiple spools passed by to give the illusion of a voyage to the North Pole, complete with refrigeration equipment simulating the change in temperature. Not all of the signature rides would be ready by opening, but this would not matter. Luna Park was an immediate and massive success. Its beauty dazzled guests, and it showcased the true potential for the concept of an amusement park. 50,000 people entered the park on Memorial Day, and Luna Park was soon a destination, drawing millions of paying guests in its first season. Its brilliant design helped the park avoid the trouble that Boynton Sea Lion Park had in attracting crowds, and the park increased more friendly foot traffic to its section of West Brighton. The park helped improve Coney Island's image as a whole significantly, further separating West Brighton from the corrupt days of McCain and Company and bringing it into a new era of elaborate entertainment and dazzling thrills. Tillyou, still operating Steeplechase Park, was not left out of his former collaborator's success. Whether Tillyou had correctly predicted it or not, the competing park did result in an increase in attendance for Steeplechase. Coney Island now had 2 modern amusement parks, and they would soon be joined by a third. Luna Park's success was destined to draw imitators, and it did so quickly. One visitor to Luna Park in its opening season was William H. Reynolds, a wealthy Brooklyn real estate developer and former New York State Senator. Using his political connections, Reynolds rumoredly convinced the sheriff's office to auction a significant portion of West Brighton real estate that had been seized from McCain after his imprisonment. Reynolds purposefully bid modestly, trying not to reveal his interests and intentions to build a park to other developers. He even purposefully lost both bids, but it was soon revealed that the winners were working for him. Reynolds then began seeking investors, attracting many wealthy and some corrupt New Yorkers, including William Engelman, the founder of Brighton Beach that no longer wanted to miss out on the revenue of the pleasure kingdom west of his resort. Construction began in October of 1903, and the park, to be named Dreamland, was set to open toward the end of the 1904 season. Despite it being created in a greedy attempt to dip into Luna Park's profits, Dreamland would not be a cheap knockoff. The park would cost $3.5 million, around $100 million today, and with Dreamland, Reynolds was determined to render the year-old Luna Park obsolete. If Luna Park had an attraction, Reynolds had a bigger or better version of it. Dreamland would have a submarine ride, water chutes, a taller tower, and even more lights, with the park advertising 1 million bulbs. Even its animal shows were to be bigger and better. Frank Bostock, an animal trainer who had been competing with Luna Park's Hagenbeck for years, was asked by Reynolds to set up a show in Dreamland. Bostock would invite the famous lion tamer, Captain Jack Bonavita, to perform with his big cats. This would be a huge draw for the park, But in 1904, while attempting to train a lion named Baltimore, Bonavita's arm was mauled. 8 months later, he would be forced to amputate it, but Bonavita went back to work, drawing bigger crowds, billed as the one-armed lion tamer. Another Dreamland attraction was the Baby Incubators, featuring real, premature infants that guests could pay to view. Dreamland's lucrative piece of real estate even had a private beach for visitors. Dreamland had a clear advantage over Luna Park, and blew Steeplechase Park out of the water, but the large investment would be hard to recoup. And unlike Thompson and Dundee, who were able to turn a profit in Luna Park's first season, it was unclear when Reynolds and Company would make back the expensive building costs. Dreamland would open ahead of schedule on May 14, 1904. Now with 3 parks, Coney Island's amusement offerings had finally outgrown the demand, and instead of drawing more business to the island for everyone, the parks now began drawing business away from each other. Tillyou had to quickly improve Steeplechase to compete, making modifications for the 1905 season, famously adding the suggestive and creepy Funny Face, which would become an icon of the park. But Tillyou did not have the budget that Thompson and Dundee or Reynolds had, and his competitors were not waiting for him to catch up. Luna Park, having only been open for 2 seasons, and Dreamland, having only been open for 1, were already undergoing elaborate and expensive renovations. Dreamland's submarine attraction was replaced by Hellgate, a thrilling ride in which guests traveled in a boat down a whirlpool and beneath the Earth's surface, achieved by a funnel slide into a long tunnel with dark ride scenes. Luna Park would change their submarine attraction to a ride called Dragon's Gorge, an indoor roller coaster that took guests to the North Pole, the Grand Canyon, and even Hell. Dreamland would add Creation, an attraction from the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. Creation was a moving panorama and illusion-based show depicting the story of Genesis for audiences. The attraction was impressive, but the real draw was the 40-foot-tall statue of a bare-breasted angel at the entrance. The depiction of a naked woman was grotesquely inappropriate at the time, but there was not the expected outrage, as religious groups came to the statue's defense, claiming that breasts are okay if they're for Bible reasons. This was yet another example of Coney Island finding the perfect overlap between conservative families and local perverts. Coney Island remained a relatively accepting and tolerant environment. Relatively. Many of the bathhouses were segregated, and the parks featured human zoos, Lilliputian villages, and blackface among other exploitative attractions. There were some opportunities for minority-run shows and businesses, such as inventor Granville T. Wood's Figure 8 roller coaster, one of the first electric coasters. The biggest news in the following few seasons at Coney Island came on July 28, 1907, when a single cigarette set Steeplechase Park ablaze, burning down the park and multiple buildings on the Bowery. Tillyou watched the flames consume his creation, before quietly walking away and taking his family to Sunday Mass. While his park continued to burn, the next day, Tillyou returned, walked on the ashes of Steeplechase, and placed a sign stating, quote, "I have troubles today that I did not have yesterday. I have troubles yesterday that I have not today. On this site will be erected shortly a better, bigger, greater Steeplechase Park. Admission to the burning ruins, 10 cents. Tillyou was true to his word, and he rebuilt Steeplechase, adding his own personal Crystal Palace, the Pavilion of Fun. This enclosed many attractions into a weatherproof building, built with fireproof steel and concrete. The Pavilion of Fun housed the Insanitarium, or Blowhole Theater. The attraction began with couples going through a dark passage called the Doghouse. They then emerged onto a bright stage. Upon standing, women would find their dresses blown up by compressed air, while 2 carnival actors, a clown and a little person, would spank men's backsides with an electric prod and a slapstick respectively. As a couple would escape, they would have to pass a sliding floor covered in barrels, which made them fall over even more and expose their underwear, all to an audience of people who had just had the same experience. The protection from the rain alone made the Pavilion of Fun a huge success. The voyeurism was just icing on the cake. The fire resulted in a better park, and the new Steeplechase was more equipped to compete with Luna Park and Dreamland. Also in 1907, Skip Dundee would die of pneumonia, leaving Thompson to run their venture alone. Without his partner, Thompson's lavish spending and drinking would result in him losing Luna Park to creditors in just a few years after Dundee's passing. For the next few years, Steeplechase, Luna Park, and Dreamland entertained Coney Island, but despite business being good, Reynolds and his investors were not profiting. The initial investment was just too high, so in 1910, Reynolds made a desperate attempt to cash out. The plan was simple. Reynolds would buy back Dreamland's bonds from his investors at a discounted price. The investors understood that their choice was between selling their bonds to Reynolds at a discount, taking a small loss from their initial investment, or keeping the bonds, which, in the case of bankruptcy, would result in a much more substantial loss. Once Reynolds had collected a significant amount of discounted bonds, he would then sell Dreamland to the city at an inflated price using his political connections. The city would then assume Dreamland's debts. Reynolds would profit the difference between the bond's original value and what he bought them for. Even if the city did not pay the debts in full, any debt payments made would be issued in order of seniority, and if Reynolds could collect enough bonds, he would theoretically be the first to benefit. There was one issue with this. Even if Reynolds' allies in the city were willing to buy back the land, they would need an explanation for the citizens. There was no way that the city could justify buying the expensive, debt-ridden amusement venture. However, they could justify buying land for a public park, but that would require all of the attractions and buildings to be removed, which came with more monetary and political issues. If only there was another way. Dreamland's 1911 season began on May 27th, or at least it would have. Early that morning, at around 1:30 a.m., a crew was working on the roof of the Hellgate attraction. All they needed to do was fix a few leaks, and the popular ride would be operational for another season at Dreamland. But instead, this is when everything would go wrong. Everything. Suddenly, the light system for the cruise began to explode. In the darkness, one of the crew members knocked over a bucket of hot tar, setting Hellgate ablaze, which is quite fitting. Luckily, Dreamland had a state-of-the-art firefighting system. Unluckily, it wasn't working. Fire crews, which were only a few hundred feet away, raced to the scene, grabbing the hoses only to find that there was no water pressure. Some had to place their hands over the nozzles just to enable the stream of water to reach the fire. At this point, more of Dreamland was in flames, and the entire island was aware of the fire. People gathered around to watch the show, while Luna Park and West Brighton's hotels began to preemptively hose down their buildings, only making Dreamland's water pressure worse. Dreamland's tall, iconic tower was set ablaze. By then, it was clear that Dreamland was going to burn, but there were still things inside that needed to be saved, namely the caged animals and the babies. Despite reports claiming that the infants were killed in the fire, all of the incubator babies were later found to be saved. The same could not be said for the animals. Colonel Joseph Ferrari, the animal trainer that had recently purchased Bostock Circus, and Captain Jack Bonavita rushed into the flames. They began to unlock the animals' cages and prepared to move them to safety. With the cages unlocked and the move beginning, it seemed that many of the animals were going to be saved. Then the firemen cut the power to the park. In the darkness, the animals attacked one another, and Ferrari and Bonavita rushed out, reportedly shooting many animals on their way to put them out of their suffering. Black Prince, a famous lion, was able to make it out, but was then promptly shot by the police. 60 animals perished in the flames. The fire continued throughout the early morning, and by sunrise, Dreamland was gone. The estimated damage was $5.2 million. Reynolds could only collect around $400,000 from insurance, as insurers were notoriously wary of placing policies on the fiery island, where most of the structures were made of wood. However, Reynolds was not determined to rebuild as Tilly was. A few contemporary historians question whether Reynolds had anything to do with the fire, or at the very least, whether he had a hand in any of the factors that prevented it from being extinguished. There is no proof that Reynolds was behind the blaze, but he certainly benefited from it. With Dreamland gone, the city could justify buying back the land, doing so for $1.8 million, despite the official estimate being $1.5 million. Reportedly, Reynolds' bond scheme worked, and he ended up profiting off of Dreamland, despite its failure to turn a profit and the fact that it was completely destroyed by flames. With that, Reynolds was done with Coney Island, and the golden age of the island's amusement parks was over. For our final story, we find Coney Island 20 years later, in the early 1930s, during the height of the Great Depression. All of our previous characters have passed. George Tilliou from pneumonia in 1914, Frederick Thompson from Bright's disease in 1919, Captain Paul Boyton from pneumonia in 1924, William Reynolds from heart disease in 1931, Captain Jack Bonavita from a polar bear in 1917. Steeplechase and Luna Park are still operating, but their glory days are behind them. The final story of Coney Island stars a new character, a man named Robert Moses. Moses was born into a well-off family. His father, a real estate mogul and department store owner, moved his family to New York before Moses was 10. Moses would go on to earn a PhD in political science from Columbia. He then networked his way into the company of Al Smith, who after becoming governor appointed Moses to Secretary of State. By this point, Moses, as many social critics had thought before him, believed that he had the answer to the city's problems. But unlike Olmsted, Moses' plan was not as flowery as a return to nature. Moses wanted to turn New York into an automobile haven, with many expressways and bridges, and if they destroyed a few low-income neighborhoods in the process, so be it. Moses had a complicated relationship with the lower class, in that he did not seem to like them very much, but definitely could not say that out loud. After becoming the commissioner of New York City's Department of Parks in 1934, Moses took control over not just parks, but beaches as well, which gave him control over Coney Island. The island had always attracted members of the middle and lower class, but after the subway line to the island was completed in 1920, anyone could travel to Coney for just 5 cents. This did result in a less wealthy clientele, but Coney's popularity only grew. Consequently, Moses drafted ambitious plans for Coney Island. He dreamed of dance pavilions, roller skating rinks, tennis and handball courts, playgrounds, and wide walking promenades. None of these plans included any semblance of saving the parks. In his 1937 plan, titled The Improvement of Coney Island, Rockaway, and South Beaches, Moses stated how he found the state of Coney Island deplorable, calling it a, quote, commentary on the lack of foresight of the citizens, with his major complaints being that the boardwalk had been constructed too close to the water and the lack of public land leading to overcrowding in the area. In the 1920s, the island had seen a shift away from the elaborate parks to independently owned thrill rides, including the famous edition of the Coney Island Cyclone in 1927. These mechanical rides had no place in Moses' vision. Moses was not against public recreation areas, and through his city planning, he would help create many. The issue was that Moses thought that all parks should be for the same purpose and motivate the same behavior. Moses' goal was to make Coney Island sterile and controlled, which was the very antithesis to its appeal. By this point, the island could benefit from more cleanliness, but it was clear that Moses was planning more than a beach cleanup. He wanted the sideshows and the parks gone, and in their place, a more predictable, standard boardwalk experience. Moses knew that Coney Island would not go down without a fight, so he implemented a variety of harassment techniques to break down the lineup of entertainment. Moses banned advertisements and loudspeakers, human pyramids and street performers. He planned to extend the boardwalk, requiring the destruction of many existing amusements, including the municipal bathhouse. The strategies paid off. Investors pulled out of properties on Coney Island, fearing that any venture would soon be rendered impossible by one of Moses' plans. In 1939, Steeplechase experienced yet another devastating fire, once again taking it as an opportunity to improve the park. After the 1939 World's Fair, which Moses had assisted in building, the parachute jump attraction was moved to Steeplechase, becoming the modern-day icon of the island. Moses, the Great Depression, and then World War II were sinking the remains of what was once America's greatest playground. But Luna Park would not end at the hands of the economic downturn, or even the hands of the ruthless Moses. It would end as its neighbor had, in flames. On August 12, 1944, a fire started in the Dragon's Gorge attraction, because of course it did. The exact reason was unknown. Just a week prior, it was announced that Luna Park had been bought by 3 park employees, including general manager William Miller, who planned to rename Luna Park to Bill Miller's Luna Park. The world would be deprived of Bill Miller's vision, as the physical and financial damage to Luna Park was too great. The park would close completely by 1946. Steeplechase, the least ambitious of the original 3 parks, was the last standing, and it was still owned and operated by Tillyou's children. With the end of World War II in 1945, Steeplechase saw some stability, with efforts to modernize certain areas and add new rides for children. But in 1949, a polio epidemic caused a large drop in attendance. The park crawled throughout the 50s, as Moses abandoned some of his initial plans to turn the island around, instead choosing to build high-rise, low-income housing for the citizens that he was displacing in other parts of New York City. Steeplechase would make it until the early 60s, when Marie Tilliou, daughter of George, finally closed the park on September 20th, 1964. The following year, she sold it to Fred Trump, who threw a demolition party for the park, tore it down to build residential housing that he never built, and in the end, all that remained was the Parachute Tower. Coney Island's state continued to worsen for the next 2 decades, before a revival effort, fueled by the nostalgia for its heyday, helped it out of its slump. In the last 40 years, the island has undergone renovations as well as preservation efforts. Revival parks and attractions have sprouted up, capturing a bit of the flavor of Coney Island in its prime, although the thrills and amusements present at the turn of the century are impossible to recapture. Sea Lion Park, Steeplechase Park, Luna Park, and Dreamland were key in establishing the concept of the modern-day amusement park, while also laying the groundwork for elaborate theme parks. At their peak, they were glorious and elegant works of art that showcased a type of escapism that soon spread throughout the rest of the country. Their demise was a tragedy, but their very existence was a miracle. As for Moses, his urban planning projects in New York extended far past his hatred of Coney Island, and as he expanded roadways and displaced citizens throughout the mid-20th century, he continued to influence amusement and theme parks. He had already seen 2 New York amusement parks close under his watch, and he would soon play a part in a third. But that is another story.